Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be taking a look at the best gaming settings for the Samsung S95F, S90F for SDR HDR for PlayStation 5, PC and Nintendo Switch 2. So let's get into it. First of all, these settings are based on the latest firmware update, which is 1131. So if you have an older firmware update, these settings may not apply to you. First, we're going to turn off some general setting that might affect the TV performance. Turn off all the power energy saving mode, as this can affect the TV brightness. Next, you will go to the picture settings. Then go to the panel care. Turn off pixel shift and adjust logo brightness. Make sure you are in SDR mode on PlayStation 5, then go to the expert settings. Put brightness on 50, contrast 38, sharpness 0, color 25. Keep Auto HDR Remaster off. Peak brightness off and contrast enhancer off. Now, if you are playing during daytime, you might want to put contrast enhancer on medium or low, and that because QD OLED tend to lift the black when it hit by a direct sunlight or there is like a brightness in the room. So you might want to mitigate this by setting the contrast enhancer to medium or low. Leave the rest of the settings on default. And put the color tone on warm too. Now make sure that your PS5 is in HDR mode. And from there, go to the game bar setting menu and then go to more settings. Now from there, go to game picture settings. Set game HDR to basic to activate HDIG. HDR10 Plus gaming doesn't matter if it's off or on because PlayStation 5 does not support HDR10 Plus gaming. Then go to Picture, Expert Settings. Now on the Samsung S95F, put brightness to 40 and contrast to 48. Because in the latest firmware update, Samsung has nerfed the brightness of the Samsung S95F in-game mode from 2220 nit to 1960 nit. So by setting the brightness to 40 and contrast to 48, you're gaining some of that peak brightness in the highlights. So it goes back to 2220 nit. As for the S90F, keep the brightness on 50 and put the contrast on 49. Then put the sharpness on 0 and put color on 30. Our tone mapping will be set to static automatically because we chose basic. And peak brightness will be high also. Now for contrast enhancer, as I said, you might want to put it to low or medium if you are playing in a bright room, though I do not recommend that you play HDR on a bright room. Now for the color space setting, both the S95F and S90F suffer from a color space problem. So for that, you're gonna go to the color space and select custom color space, set the color gamut to PT 2020, and then set the color space to normal. The problem is that both of these TV have a problem detecting the correct color space. So we are forcing both onto PT 2020, which still looks great. Unfortunately, even on the latest firmware update, Samsung haven't fixed this issue yet. Now set the color tune to warm too. And that's it for this settings. Now we're going to adjust the HDR from the PlayStation 5 HDR calibration system. So for the first page, you're gonna do it until the sun disappear. Second page, you are going to do it until the sun disappear. And for the third page, you are gonna go all the way down to the darkest area. Now, the Samsung S95F or S90F may not detect the Switch 2 as a gaming console, which means it will not go into a game mode. So you can manually switch it to game mode, but you might run into signal dropout issues and syncing issues, and that because when Samsung recognizes a device as a game console, it applies different HDMI profile and it keeps some of the HDMI link parameters alive. So if it doesn't detect Switch 2 as a console, it loads generic HDMI profile, which can cause these kind of issues. So in order to do this, you need to change the labeling of the HDMI input by holding down the center button on the remote for 2 to 3 seconds and then labeling the HDMI input to game console and rename the device to Nintendo Switch 2. Now you are going to copy all the settings that we did on PlayStation 5 to Switch 2 for both SDR and HDR. You're going to make sure that the Switch 2 is in SDR mode and then do the SDR setting. Then switch to HDR mode and do the HDR settings. Then you will go to the settings on Nintendo Switch 2. From there, you will go to display settings and set the RGB range to full range. And set screen burn and reduction to off. Then set HDR output to software only. Then go to adjust HDR. Now adjust the brightness until the sun on the right disappear. Do it exactly until it disappear. And it's better if you do this in a dark room. The second page is the HDR paper white setting. Press Y to adjust the brightness. Now you're going to bring the slider all the way to the left, then do 6 clicks to the right for the S95F and 5 clicks to the right for the S90F. Then go to themes and select basic dark to limit the influence of the automatic brightness limiter, as it won't kick as fast on a basic dark than on a basic light. Now for PC, you're gonna copy the exactly same setting as we did on PlayStation 5 and Switch 2 for both SDR and HDR, except for a few changes in HDR. So what you're gonna do is go to more settings from the Samsung game mode menu, then go to HDR settings and make sure that HDR 10 plus is basic and HDR game is also basic. Then we're gonna go to picture and then expert settings. Then if you are using the TV for productivity work, put the sharpness on 10, color on 20. If you are using it for movies, put the sharpness to 0, color to 20. If you are gaming, put the sharpness to 0, color to 30. Now you're gonna go to Windows settings and then you will go to System. Then go to Display and make sure that HDR is turned on. And then you're gonna make sure that Auto HDR is off. Now I don't have an AMD GPU, I have NVIDIA GPU, so I'm gonna be diving into NVIDIA settings. Now the TV on the latest firmware update will have G-Sync automatically activated. You don't have to manually select it. And then go for the resolution, go to PC, make sure that it's 3840 by 2160. The refresh rate for S95F 165 Hz and for S90F 144 Hz. Now I personally keep it on 120 Hz for the S95F because on 165 Hz I have artifacts issues. So dropping to 120 Hz fix these issues. So I'm just keeping it at 120 Hz. Now for the color setting, you're gonna use NVIDIA color settings. You're gonna put the color depths on the highest 32-bit and the output 10-bit. And color format is going to be RGB, and dynamic range is going to be full. Now we're going to the Windows HDR calibration settings. Now for the minimum luminance, you're gonna go all the way down to the darker, which basically is 0. Now for the maximum luminance for the S95F, it's going to be 2020. And for the S90F, it's going to be 1320. And it's going to be the same for the max full frame luminance. And that's it for today's video. If you found it helpful and useful, please consider subscribing and supporting the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.